Hello, and welcome to our conversation about comprehension, or at least the beginning start of our conversation about comprehension. So far in this course, as we approach mid-semester, next week is spring break, and so we're right at the midpoint of the semester. So far, we've really focused on the content of what it means to teach kids to read and write. We've learned all about phonemic awareness, and we've learned how to assess for that. We've learned about phonics instruction. We've learned about vocabulary, we've learned about fluency, and now we're going to start our conversation about comprehension. So as the semester progresses, once we finish with comprehension, we'll move on to different processes. We've talked about content, now we're on process. How do we teach all this stuff? And we teach that through read-alouds and shared reading, guided reading, and independent reading. And we're going to talk about that after the spring break. And then finally, to end of the semester, we'll talk about delivery systems. What are the different kinds of things that school systems use to teach all of these things? And there's a variety of those, and I'll tell you all about the pros and cons of each one of those. But to start our conversation about comprehension, what is comprehension? Well, our BFFs, Fountas and Pinnell, who are sort of the gurus when it comes to reading, especially with little kids, in their book called Teaching for Comprehension and Fluency, Thinking, Talking, and Writing About Reading, they talk about comprehension, and they say we cannot speak of comprehension as simply the product or even the goal of reading. Comprehension is the vital central core of the broader and more complex ability to reason. So it's not necessarily the goal of reading, but it's more about applying meaning to what it is that you're reading. When we say that the reader is a critical element of the comprehending process, we are not talking about the student's level or their ability. Instead, we mean the whole of the reader's prior experience, their knowledge of language, and their knowledge of the world. The reader brings all this to the processing of every single text. The transaction between the reader and the text results in the ongoing construction of understanding. And so as comprehenders, we seek to meet the demands of whatever the text we decide to read. It is helpful for us as teachers to ask, what does the reader need to know or know how to do to be able to read this text with understanding and fluency? To answer these questions, we need to think about a couple of things. First of all, what is the overall meaning of the text? What layers of meaning will the reader need to understand? Will the reader need to gather information from a variety of places, for example, graphics, illustrations, text body, and glossaries? What new or unusual language structures will the reader need to understand? What kind of structural elements both help and represent a challenge to the reader? For example, narratives, flashbacks, stories within stories, insets, graphics, categorized lists. Are there sophisticated uses of words such as metaphors, similes, and idioms? We know our ELL learners have the toughest time with that. Is there a large number of multisyllable or technical words? To what degree is inference required to understand the text? Does the text demand that the reader understand below the surface uses of language, such as irony? What background knowledge or experience is required to understand the text? What prior experience with this kind of text, for example, the genre, the structure, or the style, is needed to help the reader process with rich comprehension? How many unfamiliar words or words beyond the reader's present decoding ability are present? And so I love my little Venn diagram here in terms of what it means to be a comprehender of what it is that you're reading. But we have three things that go into a reader. We know the reader comes to the plate with some prior knowledge. We have to have some sort of understanding of the text. And then we need a purpose or the situation. So the interaction between the reader, the text, and the situation is when comprehension happens. And so for some pre-reading activities, first we need to understand, why am I reading this piece of literature? Lots of times if you go into classrooms and you say to kids, why are you reading that book? They'll say, because the teacher told me. That is not a purpose for reading. There are three purposes for reading. We read for a literary experience, we read for information, and we read to perform a task. So for literary experience, we read just for the pure enjoyment of reading. When we're reading for information, we learn, we understand, and we answer questions. And when we read to perform a task, we're actually doing something. We also need to bring in the reader's prior knowledge, and our readers need to understand this all-important question that they should ask before they approach a piece of literature. What do I already know about this? And then even taking it a step further, how will what I know help me to understand what I'm about to read. And so with this knowledge of text structures, readers can approach a text with expectations and a plan of attack. Knowledge of text structure helps the reader organize what they are about to read. And so when we come back next week, we're going to be talking about comprehension and how this connects with vocabulary. And more importantly, we're going to be discussing this idea of text structures. So thanks for listening this time, and I will see you all the next time I see you.